there's a sense of deep meaninglessness in our culture. We're really in the abyss of, I think, nihilism. Nihilism not as a philosophical orientation, but as a lived condition. And I think you're seeing people, there's a sense of desperation and panic. And I feel that's an opportunity. It's not for Christians to exploit anything. It's to say, well, let the gospel meets us in our pain, our sorrow, our lostness, our darkness. But Christ comes. I mean, the whole Advent season of, that the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us.
Welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. My name is Jonathan Brush, and with me is my co-host, who I will let introduce himself since he sounds better than I do.
I am David Rethemeyer, the co-host and producer of the Be Unbound podcast, and we are very excited to have this guest on for this week's podcast. While Jonathan does claim that I am one of the better sounding people that we have on the podcast, I think that I have been surpassed in this episode by a mile.
Well, I think highly of David's intelligence, but it's no insult to David, and you'll find out soon if I tell you that he sounds smarter than David too. In fact, I was joking with David. I said, when our guest coughs, he said more intelligent things than I've thought in the last week. So we're delighted to introduce you to Stuart McAllister. A couple of things just to put some reference here. First of all, you'll hear in our introduction, Stuart has led a remarkable life, and he shares some of his biography with us as we start the podcast, so we'll get some relevance there. You also hear us refer to some other people on the podcast today in the conversation with Stuart, specifically Cameron and Nathan. So Stuart is associated with the Thinking Out Loud ministry and the Thinking Out Loud podcast. The co-hosts and founders of that ministry are Cameron McAllister, which is Stuart's son, and Nathan Rittenhouse. Both Cameron and Nathan have done quite a few things with Unbound, spoken at our events, been on podcasts. I've been on their podcast and do a course together. I'm also privileged to sit on the Thinking Out Loud board, so full disclosure on all of those things. All of which is to say, we think a lot of Stuart and Cameron and Nathan, and this is a heavy endorsement for you to go and check out thinkingoutloudtogether.com to subscribe to their podcasts. It's released twice weekly, and I think there's just very few examples that are better in terms of Christian commentary podcasts out there. The second thing you should know is that this is a very Christian podcast today, and we are unapologetically a Christian organization. But we talk a lot about apologetics. We talk about Stuart's faith journey, and Stuart has a lot of significant encouragement to those of us who are believers, as well as perspective and wisdom to share. Stuart is an author. He and Cameron wrote a book together called Faith That Lasts. I highly recommend, and so definitely check that out. And we're just really honored and blessed to have him here, and really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you, which runs the range from being a bouncer in a dance hall to frequently and fluently quoting Augustine in regards to the church. And so hopefully that whets your appetite for the conversation to follow. Welcome, Stuart, to the Be Unbound podcast. It is an absolute honor to have you here. I have been so fortunate and so blessed to know you through our Thinking Out Loud connections. And sometimes children are introduced as, your father is such and such. And we get to introduce you this way a little bit in saying that your son is Cameron, who has done some really fantastic work for us. We've had him on various podcasts and things of that nature. We have a course that we do with Cameron and with Nathan, of course, as well. But you get a little bit credit for both of them, I believe, but perhaps a little bit more credit for Cameron as your son and co-author. And so Stuart is one of the wisest people I know. He is mentor to two of the smartest people I know, Cameron and Nathan, and has had just a big impact on me, although sometimes from a distance and sometimes through Cameron and Nathan primarily. And so that's why it's such a big honor for us to have Stuart with us today. So Stuart, thank you for your time and thanks for being here. We appreciate you being with us today.
Well, it's good to be here. I guess I didn't succeed in passing on the Scottish accent to my son, although I understand he can fake it quite well. But
I've heard him do a pretty good impression. I don't know if you want to call it authentic or not. So.
Well, there must be the overshadowing power of the mother and the mother's influence as well, which we cannot ever gainsay, so that's a key part. Yeah.
Well, Stuart, there's about, it was interesting doing what David sometimes refers to as our imaginary outline, meaning that I never stick with it very long. But it was interesting working on it a little bit here because I was like, wow, it's like what I talked to Stuart about. There's like 10,000 things that I'd like to talk to Stuart about. But we're doing this interview prior to our live event at Base Camp, which will be for our Ascend program. and you'll be speaking on several things down there. But recently, Stuart, you and I and Victoria had a discussion about some of that content for Basecamp, and it
Right.
made me think about some things. And I thought, well, here's a great chance to talk about this. So before we start that, give me just a little bit about your background, Stuart, because I know various bits and pieces of it, and I feel like I could probably spend half an hour telling some of the high points. But tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are. And when I say where you are, that would be as for me, somebody who is a very articulate speaker and thinker, who's also an absolute expert at operations, who has spent, from what I understand, basically the entirety of your life in specific Christian service. Now, I'd argue that all of us are in Christian service to some extent, but particularly working in different ministries and apologetics ministries. So tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are right now.
Well, it started, I wasn't raised in a Christian home. In fact, I had a pretty unhappy background. My dad was the product of the Second World War. He was in the Royal Air Force and then married my mum, who actually married my father as a ticket out of Christianity. So she had been raised in the Nazarene church, and dad was the kind of the dashing young former, Air Force person. And then, it's our home. It was the post-war years. It was a bit economically difficult in Britain. And I was the kid in home who just couldn't keep my mouth shut. I had an older brother, later I had a younger brother, but my dad and I just clashed. So we fought a lot. So really, by the time I was 15, I ended up one night coming home drunk, which is very much a Scottish thing, I'm afraid, getting drunk as kids. And, you just hang out around a pub and some guy would go and buy you booze we're always, you didn't drink to drink, you drink to get drunk. That was the whole deal. So I'd come home one night and he, he hit me and it ended up in a big fight. And which, of course, by this time I'm involved in street fighting and things. So I thought I was tough. You're a 15-year-old kid, what do you know? But that ended up leaving home. So I was on my own from 15 till I became a Christian. But I started out working in a dance hall, found my way. It was about finding girls and fighting and money. Those were about the three things that I was interested in, and cars, of course. So I was working also in a car business. And, life was pretty good to me. Just kind of a street philosophy, you do whatever you take, to make money. And I took up with this married woman who had left her husband, and I was asked to help her get some money back from a policeman she had been living with, which I did with my friend. And then this woman ended up living with me. So the long and short of that was that, we were living together. I thought I was doing very well, money, cars, and all the kind of stuff, and had life together. Then one day she came in and she asked me, what did I think about Jesus? And it was like, who? What? I thought Christianity was past its sell by day. I didn't think anybody seriously, but I had no room for religion. I had nothing, no resonance whatsoever. But she became a real Christian. And of course, I didn't even know what that meant. And then we split up because of that. So a couple of weeks later, her friends, these Christians, I guess they'd been praying for me and wanted to meet me. So I went with the intention really of, I think, to beat them up. Actually, that was what was in my head. And, the time I'm lifting weights, and again, I'm a big kid, I think you think you're a tough guy, and working with these Glasgow thugs and this car business. And I went to this house, and essentially all I can describe it would be, now from a Christian perspective, it was like a divine ambush. There was nothing. The couple, I'd never been in a Christian home. There was an atmosphere. There was something different that I had never seen before. The husband was what I felt kind of a soft, just a gentle man. And in my world, that was, the wife was pretty cute. So I thought, she's kind of hot. But I think she was an evangelist too. And of course, they began to talk, and I'd go in loaded for bear, but they just disarmed me. And really that evening, I went from going through the thing, 100% sure there's no God, somewhere along the conversation, because Joyce is there. And I'm thinking something's happened to her that, there might be a God. And all of a sudden, I'm pretty sure there is a God and I'm in trouble. So, and of course they gave me the gospel. So that evening I went up to their bathroom, which was appropriate in my life, and knelt down by their toilet and said, well, God, if you're there, I need to know you. So that was really the beginning.
Well, it's a dramatic story, Stuart. And then you say that's the beginning. And then that's led you to, I think, work in Europe and then eventually work here in various different organizations, but both, I think, is it accurate to say speaking and running operations and then writing and thinking? I mean, that's what I know you of. Is that a fairly accurate
No,
kind of summary of
no.
some of the different work you've done?
So what it started, I started within a year, the Lord opened the door for me to work with Operation Mobilization. And because I'd had this background, so they asked me, would I be willing to go into a kind of a dangerous areas, and then I learned about the church in Eastern Europe. Of course, I knew nothing. I mean, I'm growing as a Christian. So my first mission trip was to Yugoslavia, and I was arrested and put in jail for 40 days, shaved off all our hair, and so that was the introduction to mission. And then over the next number of years, I transferred then from that team after we got back and we were released from prison. We got back to Vienna, Austria. I transferred over to the Bible smuggling team. So for about 6 or 7 years, I was actually a Bible courier, taking Bibles into, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary. We were pretty much in Eastern Europe at least half the time. So, we'd be on the road as much and then load up, get another vehicle. And these were special vehicles with concealed compartments for Bibles and literature. And really from that grew into eventually, though my heart, I think, was towards evangelism. So I ended up becoming the pioneer of what became our personal ministries team, which was really reaching out to people in the East. And then one thing led to another. As you're reaching people, then it was like, well, where do you do if they become Christians? Then we had to work with churches, but the churches were scared. So it was then trying to be a bridge builder between you people, bringing them into churches, and then discipleship and helping. And then over years, one thing kept leading to another. So I was kind of on a trajectory of mission and evangelism, but all the time against the backdrop of Austria is a Catholic country. Of course, Eastern European was completely communist, and yet it was, variously Orthodox or whatever background. So really it threw me into a worldview stew in terms of trying to communicate. And then going down to Vienna University and sharing. I remember the first time doing friendship evangelism, and the first time I got and met radical Muslims, Turkish radical Muslims, and gosh, they tore me apart. I mean, I was trying to, and the interesting thing was it was very aggressive, and I said, remember, I'm a young believer and I'm an ex-bouncer, so I don't really take very well to these guys being in your face, and they really are in your face, and they were downright hostile. But, it was learning. I mean, I had to learn, what to share, how to share it, how to engage. And I think really that was a lot of the entrance point, Jonathan, into the more kind of, if you like, apologetic or just evangelistic, connecting with people and trying to engage and then trying to understand my own faith in a way that made sense to me. And I could translate it into categories they would understand.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. I appreciate that. And I appreciate that extra depth and kind of perspective. And I wanted to kind of profile that because from my perspective, you're somebody who has seen Christianity from a multitude of different viewpoints. There are folks who grow up in the church and maybe through a Christian heritage, and they do that. And there is a depth and a richness and a blessing to that. But there's also so maybe that allows for some deeper understanding in some ways. But I think your story is fascinating in that when I've heard you tell it before and I've heard about it, because there's so many different perspectives from coming from the outside, from then having a personal experience to then representing Christianity in various places and in various times. And really through a span of really interesting history when you talk about, you work in Eastern Europe, then through to the fact that you work in the United States and across the world in various different places. I think that's a rare and unique perspective on how the gospel is received in the world. And so with that as a background, I have a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. And I'm with a nod to your son and to Nathan, I'm thinking out loud here. So I think we have to now give them credit every time we say that we're doing that. Yeah. So it was our original idea. So I've worked with young adults really since I've been a young adult myself, and often in ministry settings, and perceive a difference in how people think about and perceive the gospel, which seems to me to be lagging in the church. And let me flesh that out a little bit. As I was coming through, and as I went through a college that was primarily secular, had a veneer of a church association. I actually majored in philosophy and religion and barely held on to my faith as I left there, right? And then I graduated from college and was introduced to all these sort of academic apologetic programs.
Mhm.
and went, ah, man, I really wish I'd known that because that was really helpful information and it helped me sort of piece my faith back together. And now I see churches that think of that as sort of normal, that they should do apologetic work. But I find that the young adults that I work with have no real frame of reference to deal with apologetic arguments that are logical, that are academic, that are historical.
Yeah.
And, you know, in a broader cultural sense, when there's a question, when feelings trump biology,
Mhm.
then whether or not Jesus was a historical figure becomes
It is.
almost academic. I mean, well, it is academic, but it becomes irrelevant. So,
Yeah. Too
yeah.
plausible.
So, Stuart, you were, I think, a deep scholar of postmodernism, which the church is sort of seen as the big boogeyman for now several years. And now I find young people that are either can't decide if they're so thoroughly postmodernist that they don't, they're like fish that don't know they're wet, or if postmodernism is outdated because it's too logical. So, if you could, does that make sense to you in terms of that
Yeah.
analysis, or is that what
It,
you experience as well?
it does. There is a very significant shift. And I think particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, it's gone very, very deep. Because I think what the effects of these ideas, which really a lot of the postmodern and that, really began in the 70s. And so it had been cascading through the universities in Europe. And then, of course, in the States, America always does everything on steroids. So they take, all things French and German and, Derrida and Foucault and all the rest. But I think so. What has been the accumulative power? I think you've got a technological issue with the arrival of the iPhone and the expansion of social media and connection, which has been a booster, an amplification system into ideas that then had been somewhat deep, and have now gone viral into consciousness. And they're not just in philosophy; they're in movies, they're in discussions, they're in all kinds of things. And I think there are three pieces to that. I think you've got postmodernism, you've got postcolonialism, and you've got critical theory. And I mean, in the biggest sense, not just critical theory in a very narrow picture of that. These have all become like mainstream, an anti authoritarian vision, kind of a broad, you have to design your own reality. But at the heart of this all is this idea, what Philip Reed talked about, that we move from religious man to psychological man. Religious man is born to be saved, and psychological man is born to be pleased. So I think that the emotive vision where looking good and feeling good has truly replaced being good and doing good. And I would say the vast majority of people do not know the difference. So when you're talking to people, you're talking through an emotive window in which ideas may or may not have purchased because it's very existential. We're talking to them as a deeply feeling person and who is so used to thinking through their emotions that really it's not reasoning, it's rationalization. Reason only plays the part of supporting what my mood says. And if I don't like the style and I don't like the taste, I don't like the manner, and I certainly don't like the content, any of the above are markers of resistance. So really evangelism and communication, I think in the church setting is the church often plays catch up. So we start learning about postmodern, these things a long time after it's already, so it's not past, but now it's the very substance, how people think, what they think with. So I think what we're in a world of, I think you're seeing revived paganism. You're seeing a lot of syncretism. You're seeing a lot of emotional confusion and just incoherence. So really a person-centered apologetic that's relational, that's prayerful, that's engaging, that has to be sensitive to the power of the spirit, and it is content-based, but the content has to be spoon-fed at times as people's ability to cope or receive it.
Yeah, with that content, Stuart, from your perspective, do you think the answer is, if you move into to some extent, this is a cyclical thing. I don't subscribe to this idea that history is completely cyclical. I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the wrong
That
worldview,
things
right? I mean,
come.
we have an end and a plot twist and excuse me, a beginning, a plot twist, and an ending. And I think of history, but there are some patterns there certainly. And so we've seen this before in the sense that Christianity faced paganism, and to
Mhm.
some extent destroyed it by rationalism and science. And so, from your perspective, is the answer to this a return to that, meaning that these things that we've learned in sort of classical apologetics, logical thought, is the core strategy perhaps to return to that? Or I've wondered if the strategy is something different, which is a return to a story. Christianity in some sense both. It is a story based in reality, and so you can play sort of both ends of that as necessary, and they work together and they can't be separated. But as there's an emphasis on, if you are dealing with a world that lives a lot in imagination to the point that they'll reject reality for feelings, is a more effective approach to approach that with a story mentality or with a mentality of let me reintroduce you to reality.
Well, to be honest, John, I think it's going to be a little bit of both in one sense, because again, depending on the person or people or audiences we're talking to, if you get the chance and the opportunity, we obviously have to, everybody is situated somewhere. Everyone has a narrative, a structure. So we've got to start from a narratival perspective. But then we're also going to try to look at comparative, comparison's the mother of clarity. So we have to do comparative apologetics or comparison either existentially, sociologically, otherwise, and, to compare truth claims, but the whole idea of objectivity of something that referees between the varying viewpoints. So I think we've got to be multifaceted in this. I do think that the apologetic power of goodness, the apologetic power of suffering, and the fact that suffering, there's a sense of deep meaninglessness in our culture. We're really in the abyss of, I think, nihilism. Nihilism not as a philosophical orientation, but as a lived condition. And I think you're seeing people, there's a sense of desperation and panic. And I feel that's an opportunity. It's not for Christians to exploit anything. It's to say, well, let the gospel meets us in our pain, our sorrow, our lostness, our darkness. But Christ comes. I mean, the whole Advent season of, that the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. So a high touch. When I go back to my own story, I think of this young couple opening their home. And for me, the encounter was something, and that's a key word. I think an encounter and an atmosphere that I couldn't explain that began to start then into the sort of the more cognitive and the rational and the engaged. Then there was content, of course, and I'm trashing it first, but over something between what was going on, they're sharing, there was a coherence that came, and I began to, I guess, it came together. It was like there was a coherence, there was a connection, something that made sense. And I think that's what the gospel does. I think that's true Christianity. It makes sense of reality, not just up here, but it gives us a fit for life. And as Christians, we need to, according to our ability to articulate, give as much information, education, facts as we can. But it's the fit for life piece that the gospel really is a healing power. Is that, there is real forgiveness, there is real restoration, there is real discovery of gifts and talents and purpose and all of these things. And those are enormous at this time, when everybody's been given the mandate, figure life out in totality and come up with some designer made life and hope that you make it. And by the way, good luck.
Yeah,
So,
well, and holding out a false idea that it can be perfect when the reality is going to be that's
yeah.
unobtainable. I'm struck by, there's a piece in there that's highly relational. You witnessed this couple, you lived with them, or you
Mhm.
you saw where they lived, and so
Yeah.
there was a connection there. Cameron and Nathan, I think it was Nathan said this on a recent Thinking Out Loud podcast. I've already quoted it like 3 times publicly, but he kind of it was a sort of a side riff to a bigger point that they're making. But he said, it's interesting. I don't know that there's anything in the Bible that says you should create a great curriculum or teach all this stuff. And he said, but there's a whole lot in the Bible that talks about hospitality.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that. It feels to me the church that I grew up in, and when I say church, I'm thinking writ large, right? So that Christianity, cultural Christianity to some extent, or the culture of Christianity that I grew up in, had a major emphasis on leadership. And
Mhm.
I certainly don't know that was wrong. And it was very beneficial to me in many ways, a lot of leadership training. But I was struck thinking about what Nathan said that to some extent, we teach a leadership course in Unbound, and we define leadership as influence. And Dr. Jeff Myers from Summit Ministry teaches that and does an excellent job of helping students see that each of them has a call to leadership.
Right.
And I think that's correct. But still, I have students who say, yeah, I'm not really a leader.
Mhm.
And I'm struck by this idea that regardless of that, and leadership training is great, you are absolutely called to hospitality. And in a world where that is so rare, hospitality has become sort of a strange superpower. If you're
Oh,
willing to engage with somebody and connect, that
I think
seems so obvious as to be too simple.
No, I think it's right, Jonathan. But what I would do, I put it in a setting. I think that, where we have to recover as a church, and many churches are doing this now, but it's been much more Trinitarian in our theology and in our practice. The relationality at the heart of the Trinity. And so when you say hospitality, koinonia, and that would they're not kind of optional extras for the Christian. We talk about fellowship halls and potluck dinners. Again, we trivialize at times or weaken something that is very, very profound. I think the whole idea that within the life of God, that with becoming a Christian, you're being invited into a new way of being. And part of that is learning to love. So to love God supremely, to love your neighbor as yourself. And in that involves service, it involves witness, it involves all kinds of things. But I think hospitality is indeed a superb way, because that's the way that I remember going around in those early days. And I mean, these are Plymouth Brethren people, so they're very, very conservative. And I'm coming out of this kind of everybody, nobody spoke with normal, everybody swore. I mean, they didn't have a swear, curse-free vocabulary. So I'm going to these people, I'm having tea and drinking, and I'm in scones, and it's all they're very sweet and they're very clean. I mean, literally, they look like being scrubbed with scrubbing brushes. And it was all just so kind of a different, but I was charmed, I think would be the word, by their love, their gentility, their kindness. And it was all peppered with, Bible verses and testimonies and the love of God. Of course, they were thrilled that I'd become a Christian. Of course, and they would encourage me with some teaching, but it was just such a marvelous word. So I think you're right. I think opening homes and hearts to people, spending time with them, loving on them, but holding a clear line. I mean, you can't give hospitality if you're living the kind of a divided life. If you yourself are kind of, in other words, it works the other way. You go to them and you're in their world, you're boozing it up, you're getting, you're living on the edge and you're trying to be the cool cat or whatever, you think that the only way you do this is you do it out of gospel grace, out of kindness, out of commitment, out of robust holiness. And I mean that in the broad sense. And I think that's where hospitality, it grows out of that.
Well, I think that last part is so important that, I think often people are tempted to think that hospitality means conforming to be like somebody else to relate.
Yeah.
And I think the people that I've most respected in my life are the people that, and it's not that they were nonconformists, it's that they didn't feel the desire to adjust to me. They welcomed me into them, into their
Well,
lives.
let me use Nathan as an example, because like Nathan comes from your neck of the woods, and of course, and he has the appearance and everything. And I know that at times, and Nathan was well aware of this, that he would go up to places there like Harvard or wherever, or different, and he looked different, and people would think, oh, here's this hayseed coming in, or this guy. And of course, he got up, and once they saw him, heard him, and talked to him, they met someone who was so profoundly interesting and able to engage with the deepest of ideas, but from a heritage. And he was never ashamed of his heritage. He's never ashamed to talk about, the family and the life that he lived and the community that he represents and so forth. In fact, used that very, very, very wisely in telling stories that grounded it in it. And I think that's it. But that there was something incredibly, I think, pure about his witness. And I mean that not he's perfect, but there was a goodness to it. And so when we think of that triumvirate of goodness, beauty, and truth, as a Christian, those are apologetic things, not taking them as smear ideas, but living a good life, being preoccupied with a good aesthetic beauty, and always grounding it and tying it to truth and truthfulness, which is really faithfulness. And maybe where the church has gone astray a little bit, I like Ozzy's thing when we talk contrast relevance with faithfulness. You get people who are more interested in what he calls homo up-to-datum, the person who wants to be always trendy and cool. That's not where it's at all. I think it's be genuine, be authentic, be Christ-centered, gospel-driven, and kingdom-focused, basically.
Yeah, that's a good observation. Cameron McAllister and Nathan Rittenhouse have a podcast called Thinking Out Loud. And if you've ever met or listened to them, they are the very opposite of cool, which makes them cool in that kind of indefinable way. And what I mean by that is that neither of them would conform to any cultural standard of kind of immediate relevance. And yet they both have such strong foundations that immediately in engaging with them, you will be pulled in and learn something much deeper than the surface sort of appearance. And I think both of them have been good examples for me in that. And every
Mm.
time I'm with them, they're people that are very. Isn't authenticity the word of the day now or something like that?
Well,
I
it is, but I think there's a resonance to it. I mean, I think the difference between authenticity as a product, if you like, and authenticity
right,
as a real virtue. So I think it's just to be, a friend of mine said, part of the challenge I heard as a young Christian, Christians, we should be naturally supernatural and supernaturally natural. So that we breathe the air of transcendence and we also live with immanence. We have our feet firmly on the ground, but we're also connected. We live in the heavenlies in that sense. So it's that communion, the union and communion aspect that we are walking with the King. He's with us. But he comes down into the gospel goes into the very nitty gritty of experience, pain, suffering, sorrow, disappointment, betrayal, anger, all of the above. And that's where the gospel does its best work.
And I kind of wonder if there's a part of this that also is identity in how we engage with people in the culture today, especially I notice a lot in people that are more on my generation, where really just about any sort of like secular or postmodern believing person that you'll come across is looking to find their hope and their fulfillment in life based on their identity. They basically take the ideas that they believe and they make it their identity, and they believe that that is how they will find fulfillment in life. And something that is unique about the Christian life is that we have an identity in Christ that is also very much living to what God has called you to do on an individual basis. It's not just it is conforming to the standard and becoming more like Christ, but it is also a looking to what God has called you uniquely
Oh
to
yeah.
do.
Okay.
And it's not something that just about any other idea in postmodern culture will offer you.
Well, we are in a serious problem at the moment because the issue, and one of the Georgetown professor recently wrote a book called the Identity Trap, and he's been really looking thoroughly, as have others, on this subject where we've made identity and identity politics and performativity out of your unique identity and control of that. And this is a real problem for a liberal society because it tribalizes, it fragments, it breaks not only into individual, but we have group
Mhm.
identities, and we lose the ability then to converse, to communicate. And in fact, in some of the identities, you're actually taught to completely shut off others who are considered as being the transgressors of those who are basically, the source of violence, oppression, and so forth. The good side of the postmodern was opening up to some of these conversations we needed to have because history had been cruel and people had been silenced and voices had not been heard. So we needed to hear many of them and give them dignity and value and vision. The problem is we've lost the ability then, we've turned that into a weaponized system in which we
Mhm.
think we control this and we build these Berlin walls of separation. I think the biblical idea of identity is starting from the idea of the Imago Dei, that everybody is made in the image of God, by God, and for God. So we have intrinsic value and dignity, everybody. But the biblical story also says that we're all dead in trespasses and sins, so all have fallen and fall short of the glory of God. So again, made in the image of God, all of dignity, all damaged, but then all possibly can receive forgiveness through the gospel of Christ. We can be redeemed, we can be saved. So I could talk to anyone, irrespective of their background, Muslim, Hindu, whatever, and see that they have dignities. I may not agree with their ideas. I may challenge their worldview. I may be appalled by some of their lifestyle choices at times, but I see them as made in the image of God by God, and I treat them that way with grace and dignity. And I understand that they were seeking for light. But so much of the identity problem is making mine unique and then living in an isolated fortress. And it
Mhm.
becomes a rhetorical device to actually
Mhm.
control and manipulate conversation. And it doesn't open up to the possibility of learning from others and through others in the widest sense of what that requires.
Well, Stuart, one of the things that we talk about at Unbound, and we don't put it on the website because it would take a lot of time to explain, but we frequently tell our students as we talk about it as a staff. We say to some extent we exist to create special forces for the local church.
Mm.
And the way I say that is that, you know, coming back to our earlier part of our conversation, you're somebody who has a wide ranging perspective on Christianity. And we're in a time where I see a bit of a bifurcation happening where you have mega churches on one end that at least outwardly appear quite healthy in terms of resources and size and all those things. And they continue to attract a lot of people. And in some cases, I think do so because they hold to a more orthodox belief system. And yet you have local churches and a lot of mainline churches really shrinking. And you get this growing group of people who, pollsters would tell us identify themselves as having no religious affiliation and yet say that they're quite spiritual, meaning that they don't want to attend some sort of organized religion, which in North American culture means they're not attending a church.
Yeah.
So I see a growing interest in spirituality and, in fact, in some ways, a growing dedication to Christianity among young people that we're privileged to work with, and yet an increasing disenfranchisement from the local church. From my perspective, I can't separate those two. To me, the local church is the embodiment of what we're called to do. But give me some of your wisdom and perspective on that in terms of the role of the local church in our current world and culture.
I think first of all, you're right. We're facing a terrible overreaction, and there's a problem that needs to be solved. But Augustine famously said, that he that doesn't have the church as his mother can't have God as his father. So there's a sense in which, and church, I mean, the scriptures tell us, don't forsake the assembling yourself together. So there's something very profound about church. If I see church just as a service for me, and so I use it as a consumer product that I go, and if it doesn't meet the criteria that I measure out, and then I only go on those bases, so I just do church online or whatever, then I'm being driven more by consumerism than by the gospel. So I think there is a legitimate desire to have a healthy church, of course, and the church needs to have certain features in it. I think biblical preaching, healthy worship, the sacraments rightly practiced, and so forth. And but the need of the church to be a community and to build the relational fabric and the discipleship, the instruction, it's not an optional extra. There has to be a central part. And I believe that the church is God's agent of change. And you think, well, it's not perfect, it's messy. Of course, well, that's the point. That he takes the weak things of this world to confound the wise, 1 Corinthians chapter 1. He takes the broken, and those are the very people that God uses. That person who can't necessarily string a sentence together very well, or is not terribly loving, or has got a problem at home at times, but who genuinely loves Christ, comes to the cross, comes to forgiveness, takes the sacraments and worships the Lord. They're on that healing journey. So the church is a place, people say, oh, it's full of hypocrites. Where else could hypocrites go? Everybody's a hypocrite. Everybody's a hypocrite. In cancel culture today, you just get destroyed. There's no atonement. There's no forgiveness. The church is a place where we recognize we're hypocrites. We're not trying to be it, but we recognize we need grace. And it's because of that we go there. Because of that, we take the sacraments. It's because of that we hear the word, and where repentance and faith are the conditions of our ongoing life. It's not that I one time repent. I repent regularly because I'm a sinner in need of grace, but I delight, and through the light that I get in the fellowship of others, I see things that I need to work on. I see inspiration of people who live a better life than I do, who raise their kids more consistently, who spend their money more wisely, who are better and nicer people. And I see some that are grumpy old bears and think, no, that guy needs a 2x4 over the side of the head, and someday we still get one, but in God's grace, he brings us together, and it's a community. So I'm very, very pro the church, and we need the church. And with all of its warts, it's part of God's recipe for change.
Well, Stuart, as we kind of roll to some conclusion here, I find myself a lot of times telling young adults and say, there is no question that you live in challenging times. Congratulations. I mean, God must have thought a lot of you if he put you here and to face
Yeah.
these things. But newsflash, you don't get the option of ever living in non-challenging times. And if you did, it would, be somewhat insulting in the sense that you obviously had no capability. And I think you'd find it boring. So, I've said this in the podcast several times. I mean, I'm always quite delighted that I'm not facing the Black Death. And I'm pretty happy that I'm not living during World War II in the sense that I think those were really, two examples of quite catastrophic times that eclipse some of our current struggles. At the same time, there are very real struggles that are very serious and have eternal and mortal consequences. And so there's great things to be faced. I have some impatience with constantly rehashing what is wrong because I think it causes us to forget that we live in the hope of something redeemed. And so as we kind of wind to a conclusion, Stuart, you have tremendous perspective, wisdom that has been hard earned, and lots of experience. As you look forward, speaking from that base, which is more than I can speak from and more than David can speak from, What are you hopeful for? What are you excited about as you look forward?
Well, I think, the purpose of a good story only works if it has a good ending. And, when you look from the book, the Bible is a narrative. It's a library of books with one massive narrative overarching. And I think we need to get to know the story. The deeper we dig into the story is that this story has a good beginning, has a tremendous collapse and a fall, has a story of ups and downs of God's people in history, but it's the story of the cosmos as well. And it has a tremendously grand climax. Because I think one of the things we like about good story is that when the hero writes in, the old John Wayne Mill films or Clint Eastwood or whoever it was, and finally the town has been dominated by the bad guys, then the good guy comes in and then, order is restored. And usually the good guy disappears and leaves the town to get on with his life. But in the Christian story, we cannot bring history to its conclusion. Politics isn't going to do it. Economics is not going to do it. And in fact, if anything, it's going to be escalation. The Bible makes that clear. But God has the first word and God has the last word. And to me, that's the nature of Christian hope, that there's a transcendent power, a transcendent goodness, a transcendent holiness that is personal, is just, is righteous, and is all the details. And He is going to bring the end, and He is going to make all things well. So I think that's my hope, that we live in the story. I play my part. I don't know what my part is fully in every detail, but if I honor Him and follow Him, then that resurrection and the renewal, the new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Revelation 22, the picture of, the healed world with no more tears, no more death, no more sorrow, no more sighing. So that's the end, but it's an end at His hands. So I want to work in this time in space-time history to share, to help, to encourage as much as we can, to look to the good ending. And so the God of hope, as it says in Romans 15, may the God of hope fill you with joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. So hope is from Him, through Him, and ultimately to Him.
Well, thank you, Stuart, and thank you for your time. And I'm very much looking forward to getting to spend some time with you in Gulf Shores, Alabama, as we will be on the beach. We'll be praying for warm weather. David and I have been there when it's been beautiful, and we have been there when we were feeling a little cheated by the Alabama Tourism Board in terms of the weather situation. So we've had more of the latter than more of the former than the latter. And so hopefully we'll get that again. And we're looking forward to you being able to share with our students, and delighted to be able to introduce you to our students and our audience in this fashion. So thank you so much for your time and for being part of the podcast today.
Thank you.
Well, David, I feel much more intelligent than I was before, and encouraged and interested, and really looking forward to base camp, frankly.
Oh my goodness. Yes, our students are in for an absolute treat, and I personally would be delighted to have him speak at pretty much every event that we do, because I think that he seems like the type of individual who would have a wealth of knowledge and a fascinating perspective on pretty much any topic that we gave to him.
Yeah, I think our commentary in between finishing with Stuart and then recording this was David said, can we hire him permanently for every event for the future? And certainly that'd be delightful. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Stuart. Again, he is connected to Thinking Out Loud, and we failed to mention the intro, and we need to correct that now, and also the C.S. Lewis Institute. So if you're not familiar with the C.S. Lewis Institute, really excellent content and some very interesting stuff there, very beneficial. So definitely take the time to check that out. And, just a final note here, you heard us refer to a couple of different ministries, and you heard us refer a lot to Base Camp. Base Camp is the second live event for our flagship Ascend program. It takes place someplace in the South, and in the last few years in Gulf Shores, Alabama, where we used to rent a large beach house. Now we rent several large beach houses, and it's an absolutely phenomenal location and spot. It's a great set of houses, and it's always just a lot of fun. Ascend is a program that is based with, as the foundation of that, we have these live events where we can connect with students in person. And Basecamp specifically talks about the kinds of things and the kinds of skills that we think are necessary to live everyday life in an extraordinary way. And so we talk about some time management, task management at Basecamp, but we specifically talk about resilience. And in Basecamp, the context for resilience is this, and this is reflected in our conversation with Stuart. We live in a fallen world. And if you think you can get through this world by living it in some perfect Instagram curated way or social media presented way and avoid pain and hardship, that just means it's going to be more brutal when the reality happens. And so while we wish all of you the best of possible lives and for as little hardship and pain as possible, that's just not reality. And what we have found is that there's so many people in today's culture that think that's avoided. And so at Basecamp, we spend a lot of time talking about resilience. How are you to face reality, the world as it actually is, and then live with that reality, and not just that, to thrive in it. So we talk a lot about resilience. We talk a lot about failure. We talk a lot about what it's like to be on the other side of failure. David, we also do a lot of fun stuff. So what are some of your favorite memories and highlights from Basecamp?
Oh, let's see here. I mean, with the houses that we rent for base camp are right along the beach. And so there's always some fantastic beach activities there. So there is beach volleyball, typically some ultimate frisbee that gets going. There is sandcastle competitions. And if you know any of our students, they are extremely creative. And so we always enjoy getting to see some of the things that come out of that. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of fun things that we get to do. And we were just talking on a meeting earlier today about base camp and how a lot of it just ends up coming from the students and students just finding ways to create culture together. And that can range anywhere from having spontaneous dance parties to just engaging in some really deep discussions far, far into the evening. So it's a
And
really
sometimes
fantastic time.
those are happening simultaneously.
That's very true. Yeah. On either
It's
side of
amazing.
the room. I don't know how
That's
they
right.
coexist, but they managed to make it happen.
And that last part is an important note. We talk to you at the end of these podcasts about the things that Unbound does, about our high school programs, Equip, Declare, and Explore, about our flagship program, Ascend, about the classes we teach, Navigate, and we now have a course for parents as well this release that you can learn about at our website that we're really excited about. But the heart of this is our students. And Base Camp is a really fun event. Apex is our flagship event. It's our first live event of the year. It happens in August in Michigan, and it's very big. I'm not sure if fancy is the right word, but it's got a lot of big events going, and we have a big stage and all of the stuff that comes with that. Base Camp is very much a more connected, almost intimate event. We cater food into the house. We do some of our own cooking. And so we're eating together, we're living together. And I occasionally tell people that, and I forget that they don't know our Unbound students. And they say, wait a second, you're going to go spend a week living in a beach house with, a zillion young adults? That sounds horrible. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is the most fun we have during the year. Like, this is the entire experience from top to bottom, side to side, and front to back is just a highlight of our year. It is so much fun. And the students we get to spend time with are such quality and such character that it will be marked by really deep conversations, by a lot of laughter, by an incredible amount of joy, by a lot of thoughtfulness, and by the occasional revealing and sharing of pain as we support and walk with each other through some hard times. And all of those are part of the Basecamp experience, and very much looking forward to it. So if you're a student listening to this, we will see you soon at Basecamp. And if you're interested in becoming a student, check us out at beunbound.us.
It's an incredible opportunity. It's an incredible community. And if you have any interest in you or another young adult in your life, that you should check it out. And I think, Jonathan, there's one final encouragement that you need to give to everyone.
That's right. Until we talk to you next time, be Unbound.